Have you ever imagined being faced with a mystery so profound that it challenges everything we know about life and death? What you are about to hear could completely change your perception of the afterlife. A child was declared in brain death by doctors. No explanation, no hope, no chance of return. But against all odds, something impossible happened. She came back. And what he said when he woke up left his parents in shock, the doctors perplexed, and raised a terrifying question. What really happens after we die? This is not just another story about near-death experience, NDE. It is a warning, a frightening revelation that has come from the other side and may contain a forbidden secret about what awaits us after life. Angels, a portal to another dimension, a destiny that no one wants to face. This child saw something indescribable, something that will stir your soul and make you question everything you believed until now. The doctors were certain she would never wake up again. Her brain was inactive, her vital signs were weak, and the machines were already keeping her body functioning artificially. But then, something happened. Suddenly, she opened her eyes. And what he said made the medical team freeze in place. I saw, and they sent me back with a warning. What did she see on the other side? What does this message mean for all of us? And most importantly, why was she chosen to reveal this terrifying secret? You are about to experience a story that defies logic, science, and even faith. If you believe in life after death, this story will reinforce your convictions. If you don't believe it, get ready to have your vision completely transformed. Stay until the end, because this isn't just a story. It's a warning that could change your life forever. Jackson lived in Bluefield, a quiet little town in the state of West Virginia, where everyone knew everyone and life followed a peaceful rhythm, far from the chaos of big cities. His house was in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by tall trees and streets where children still played without fear. He was a boy full of life, had 5 years of pure energy. Those who run barefoot around the yard, make up stories with their toys, and ask questions that not even adults can answer. Your parents, Marky, Evelyn, they always said that Jackson had a special sparkle in his eyes, as if he saw the world in a different way. Curious, observant, but also very affectionate, he loved drawing and had an inexplicable fascination with the sky. "Mommy, what's up there?" he asked, pointing to the clouds. "Do people live there?" Evelyn smiled and replied that maybe one day he would find out. But not even in his worst nightmares would he have imagined that this discovery would come in such a brutal way. It was in a hot September afternoon, when the sun gilded the leaves of the trees and the gentle breeze swayed the living room curtains, that everything changed. Jackson was playing in the backyard, laughing as he chased the family dog, a golden retriever named Buddy. Everything seemed normal, until suddenly he stopped, put his hands to his head, and staggered. Evelyn, who was watching from the balcony, frowned. Something was wrong. "Jack, is everything okay?" she asked, quickly descending the steps. But the boy didn't respond. Her little face, which always radiated joy, now looked pale, and her small lips trembled. Then his eyes rolled back, his body stiffened, and in a terrifying instant, he collapsed to the ground. Evelyn screamed. Time seemed to slow down. She ran to him, calling his name desperately, but he didn't react, her small body motionless, her arms lying at her sides, her breathing shallow. Her heart raced. Fear took over. Something terrible was happening. She picked Jackson up and with shaking hands tried to wake him up. "Stay with me, my love, please." But there was no answer. Despair grew with every second. Evelyn stormed into the car, holding her son in her arms as Mark sped toward the hospital. Every red light seemed like a nightmare, every curve a torment. Time was a cruel enemy. As soon as they arrived at Bluefield Regional Medical Center, the doctors took control. Jackson was rushed to the emergency room, and Evelyn and Mark were left in the waiting room. Amid the terrifying silence of the hospital hallways, the cold lights, the distant sound of heart monitors, and the strong smell of disinfectant seemed to create an even more suffocating scene. Minutes passed. 10, 20, 30. Until a serious-looking doctor came out of the door and walked towards them. The look in his eyes said it all before the words even left his mouth. "We need to talk." The ground seemed to disappear beneath Evelyn's feet. "No, please don't. Your son's heart has stopped. We did everything we could, but his brain no longer shows activity. He has entered brain death." The air was knocked from Evelyn's lungs. The world spun. The phrase echoed inside her like thunder. Brain death. Like this, Jackson couldn't be dead. He was only 5 years old. He was strong, healthy. He was playing in the yard minutes ago. The doctor continued explaining technical terms, but nothing made sense. Science said Jackson was gone. Even though his heart still beat with the help of machines, he was no longer there. Evelyn entered the room and saw her son lying on the bed, small, fragile, connected to wires and tubes. The heart monitor pulsed mechanically, but his eyes remained closed. She held his hand, warm and soft as always, and refused to accept what they were saying. "You're still here, Jack. Can you hear me?" But there was no response. The hours passed. Night fell, and the only thing that could be heard was the sound of the equipment keeping his body alive. The doctors were already starting to talk about the possibility of turning off the support, of preparing the family for goodbye. But no one knew that Jackson hadn't just shut down. He was somewhere else. A place beyond human understanding. He saw something, heard something, he felt something. And when he came back, it wasn't the same boy who left. They were 3 in the morning, and the doctors made their rounds normally. Nothing indicated any change. But then, the impossible happened. Jackson opened his eyes. The monitors started beeping uncontrollably. The nurses ran. The doctors rushed into the room. The parents, who were sleeping on the sofa next to them, woke up with a start. The boy who had been declared without brain activity was there, looking around as if he had just woken up from a dream. And then, he whispered something. His voice was weak, but it carried a frightening weight. "Mom, I saw everything." And what he said next sent the entire room into a sepulchral silence. The doctors stopped. The parents shuddered, because Jackson didn't just come back to live. He came back with a message, and this message could change everything. Some truths are not for everyone, but you felt it. A sign, a chill, a message impossible to ignore. Sign up and activate the bell. Leave your like so that this revelation reaches more people. Something bigger is happening, and you are part of it. At that very moment, the instant the doctors declared Jackson alive, brain death, something unbelievable was happening to him. His small body remained motionless in the hospital bed, connected to wires and machines that kept his heart beating, but his consciousness was no longer there. It was as if, suddenly, the weight of gravity ceased to exist. A feeling of indescribable lightness came over him. First came a distant hum, like the sound of wind rushing through an empty hallway. Then, a strange pressure in the ears, like when you dive deep into the water. He felt his body vibrate inside, as if something was breaking away from him, something that was once part of him but was now free. And then, he just left. Jackson floated. He could see everything, but from an impossible angle. He looked down, and there he was, your own body, lying in that cold bed, surrounded by hurried doctors and distressed nurses. His mother was at the bedside, holding his little hand, but he felt that I was no longer inside that inert body. He was above it all, watching the scene as if he were a spectator. Evelyn sobbed, her head resting on her son's chest. His shoulders shook, his fingers squeezed his little hand, as if his strength could bring him back. Mark, Jackson's father, was standing in the doorway, stunned, unable to believe what was happening. In his eyes, there was an emptiness, a silent desperation of a man who had just lost his son. Jackson wanted to scream. He wanted to tell his mother that he was there, that he could see her, that he could hear her, but his voice didn't come out. He tried to touch his own body, but his hand went through the sheet as if it were made of air. He no longer felt the weight of the matter. He no longer felt fatigue or pain. There was only consciousness floating amidst the unknown. Then a different sound caught his attention. A crack, as if something was breaking in half. Instantly the room began to darken, but not as if the lights were going out. It was as if the walls were disappearing. The hospital room seemed to dissolve around him, like paint running down a painting. And then he saw it. One crack opened in the air just above it, a kind of portal, a crack in the very fabric of reality. From there came a light so intense that it was impossible to look directly. But at the same time, that light seemed to call him, was warm, comforting. A deep peace came over him, a feeling so overwhelming that it made him forget all fear. Effortless, he was sucked into this light, as if being attracted by an invisible force. The hospital was left behind. His mother's screams were silenced. Now, everything around him was white, infinite. No walls, no floor, no sky. He was in a place that didn't seem to follow any earthly logic. Jackson realized that I wasn't alone. Shadows began to form in the distance, figures that seemed to move without stepping on anything. Some had human shapes, others were just golden silhouettes, shining like stars. He felt these presences watching him. Some looked familiar, others didn't. There was something great there, something he couldn't fully understand. It was then that he heard a voice, strong, but at the same time serene. A voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once, but that spoke directly to him. "Jackson, you can't stay here." The boy turned around, trying to find the source of that voice, but there was no one. Just the infinite light and the shadows in the distance that seemed to watch him. "It's not your time yet." The surrounding light began to contract, as if it was closing in on him. Jackson felt a tug, as if an invisible current was dragging him backwards. He tried to resist. For some reason, he didn't want to go back. The place he was in transmitted absolute peace, something he had never felt before. Why should I leave? And then he saw something that made his heart, or whatever was left of it, race. A gigantic being appeared in front of him. It had a human shape, but it was not like the people on Earth. It was bigger, brighter. It had huge wings, but they didn't move. His skin was a golden light. His eyes seemed to contain the entire universe within them. Jackson knew, without anyone needing to tell him, that he was facing something sacred. The being lowered himself, reaching the boy's height. His gaze was intense, but there was no threat in it, just a silent urgency. Listen carefully. The voice was firm, but it carried a weight that Jackson couldn't explain. And then the angel, or whatever he was, told him something. Something that made his little conscience tremble. Something he could never forget. Jackson tried to speak, tried to ask questions, but the light around him began to dissolve. He was being pulled back, sucked in by an invisible force. The being continued to stand there, observing, but his eyes said everything that was needed. Tell them, before it's too late. And then darkness enveloped him again. His body fell. The impact was so strong that it felt like he was falling from a skyscraper, and in the next instant, Jackson opened his eyes. The hospital monitors burst into alarm. Nurses screamed, doctors ran. Evelyn felt the air go out of her lungs when she saw the impossible happens before your eyes. His son was alive, but he was no longer the same. His skin was still pale, his eyes seemed bigger, wide, as if he had seen something that the human mind was not supposed to understand. And then he whispered, "Mom, I saw it." And what he said next would change everything. The truth about the other side was about to be revealed. Jackson's eyes were wide, fixed on a distant point, as if his mind was still trapped somewhere between this world and the next. His breathing was ragged, his skin cool as marble. Evelyn could hardly believe what she was seeing. Her son, who doctors had declared in brain death, now he was alive before her, but something in him had changed. There was a weight in those little eyes, something deep, ancient, as if he had seen a secret that no child should bear. The hospital room was completely silent. Everyone waited. The doctors stood there, unable to explain how a child who should no longer consciously exist was there, looking at them with an expression as if he had a lot to say. And then, with a weak voice, but carrying an indescribable weight, Jackson began to speak. "I saw everything." His voice was different. It wasn't just a report from a scared child. It was as if he had returned from an infinite journey, bringing with him something impossible to fully understand. His mother held his hand tightly, trying to hold back the tears. "What did you see, my love?" Jackson blinked a few times, as if he was getting used to the weight of his own body again. Then, with a sigh, he began to describe the unimaginable. "I fell, but I didn't fall in the dark." The mother's eyes filled with tears. "What do you mean, son?" "I was in a different place. It was very big, and there was a light so strong that I couldn't see beyond it, but it didn't hurt. It wasn't like the sun. It was a warm light. It surrounded me on all sides, and I knew I wasn't alone." He paused, taking a deep breath. It was difficult to put into words what I had experienced. He tried to remember every detail, but it seemed like part of that reality was already erasing from his memory, like a dream that dissolves when he wakes up. But there was something he would never forget. The sky. "I think it was the sky, Mum, but it wasn't like I imagined. There was no floor. There was no end. I was in the middle of everything and nothing at the same time. I felt a warmth inside, something that I can't explain." His voice shook a little and he looked at the doctors, as if seeking confirmation that someone there believed what they were saying, but no one moved. Everyone was hanging on to his words, waiting for what would come next. Then I heard a voice. First it was low, it seemed distant, but then it was like it was everywhere at once. I couldn't see who was speaking, but I felt like someone was watching me. After a while, the light started to move as if it was taking shape, and then he appeared. Evelyn felt a shiver run up her spine. He who, Jackson? A man. But he wasn't a man like us. He was giant. Much bigger than anyone I've ever seen. But he wasn't scary. He had wings, huge wings that glowed but didn't move. I knew he wasn't from here. I knew he wasn't like us. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. An angel. He looked at me and said my name. He knew who I was, but I had never seen him before, and then he got down in front of me and told me I couldn't stay there. The doctors exchanged looks, some in disbelief, others completely shocked. It was impossible to ignore the way the child spoke, the details he brought. I wasn't making up a story. I asked him why. I said I wanted to stay. It felt so good. I never felt like this before. But he said it wasn't my time. He said I had to come back. Jackson's eyes filled with tears for the first time. I asked if I could see Grandma, but he said no, that she was somewhere else, that I couldn't go there now. Evelyn felt a lump in her throat. Her mother, Jackson's grandmother, had passed away when he was just 2 years old. He didn't remember her. How could he say something like that? But then he got serious. He looked at me differently and said I had to bring a warning. The room seemed to get colder. Even the doctors and nurses began to feel restless. Jackson looked at his mother and, with a tone of urgency, whispered, "He said people forgot." "Forgot what, my love? What comes next?" Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. "The angel said that people live as if this is the only life there is, as if nothing else matters. But he said that is not the case. He said that there is something much bigger, and that people are running out of time without realizing what really matters." The silence in the room was deafening. He said that there are things happening that we don't see, things that are preparing what comes next, and that some people already know, but they don't want everyone to find out. He said that time is running out. Ending for what, son? Jackson lowered his head as if he wasn't sure how to explain. He didn't show me everything, but he said that something is coming, something big, and that a lot of people won't be ready. Evelyn's hands were shaking. He said I had to come back, that I needed to tell this, that people needed to remember. The mother couldn't speak. He just held his son in his arms, trying to understand everything he said. Jackson took a deep breath, still looking at his mother. He told me to ask, "Do you remember what comes next?" The silence continued, as if everyone in the room had lost their breath at the same time, and Jackson looked around, as if he knew the answer. What he had seen, it wasn't a dream, and now no one there could deny it anymore. If you've ever felt like there's something bigger than this life, if you've ever had a strange dream, a feeling of déjà vu that made you wonder what comes next, tell me in the comments. Do you believe that Jackson really had an encounter with an angel? What do you think he meant by people forgot? I want to know your opinion because this could be one of the most important stories we've ever brought here on the channel. The hospital room was completely silent, except for the intermittent sound of the heart monitors that were still processing the impossible. Doctors and nurses were frozen in place, as if the scene before them defied all known laws of science. Evelyn held Jackson's hands tightly, feeling the warm temperature of her son's skin, a touch that, minutes before, should have been impossible. His heart was racing. She wanted to speak, but couldn't find the words. The chief doctor, Dr. Richard Evans, an experienced man used to dealing with critical situations, seemed to have completely lost his composure. His gaze, fixed on the monitors, alternated between confusion and pure astonishment. He blinked several times, as if trying to wake up from a nightmare. Jackson was there, conscious, breathing, talking, but how? This can't be happening. The words escaped in a whisper. He exchanged glances with the other doctors, who seemed equally shaken. Was it a miracle or an error in science? The nurses, previously so confident in their duties, were visibly shaken. Some had their hands over their mouths, others seemed unable to move. The protocol said that cases of brain death were irreversible. A brain without activity did not come back to life. This has never happened before. Dr. Evans finally moved, approaching Jackson's bed. He took out his medical flashlight and carefully opened the boy's eyelids, directing the beam of light into his pupils. They reacted immediately. His brain was working. But how? That's impossible. The doctor's voice came out almost like a lament, filled with disbelief. The penny hadn't dropped yet. The tests that confirmed Jackson's brain death were there, ready, signed. The devices, the reports, everything indicated that there was no way back. And yet, there he was. Jackson blinked a few times, taking in everyone around him. He seemed calm, but at the same time there was something different about him. A sparkle in the eyes that wasn't there before. A seriousness that didn't suit a 5-year-old. Evelyn finally found the strength to speak, her voice choked with emotion. "Jack, my love, you're back." She hugged him with all her might, hot tears streaming down her face. Mark, who until then remained in a state of shock, finally moved. He approached the bed, kneeling next to his son. His eyes were red, disbelieving. "Son, can you hear me?" Jackson slowly turned his head and looked directly at his father. "I saw everything, Daddy." The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Dr. Evans took a step back. He needed to understand what was happening. I needed a rational explanation. He looked at the other doctors, waiting for someone to say something, but there was no response. One of the residents, Dr. Parker, finally broke the silence. This has never happened before. We need to repeat the exams." Evelyn immediately tensed up. "What do you mean by repeating the exams?" His voice was louder than he expected. "He's here. He's talking. You said he would never come back." Dr. Evans swallowed. He knew she was right. What they were witnessing made no sense. The nurse in charge, Lisa Carter, he still held the clipboard against his chest, as if he was trying to protect himself from reality. She looked at Jackson as if he were a living enigma. Then, with a trembling voice, he murmured, I've never seen this before. Never." The movement began. Nurses adjusted equipment, doctors left and returned with medical records, tests were ordered. They needed to understand what had happened. While all this was happening around her, Evelyn didn't let go of her son's hand. Jackson blinked slowly, as if he was still taking in his surroundings. He looked weak, but not scared. She ran her fingers gently through his hair, a gesture she used to do when he woke up from a nightmare. "Are you okay, my love?" Jackson nodded slowly, but then frowned, as if remembering something. His gaze fixed on a distant point, as if he was still between two worlds. And then he said something that made everyone's blood in the room run cold. "The angel said I had to tell you. Time is running out." Dr. Evans stopped taking notes. Evelyn's eyes widened. Mark gripped the edge of the bed, feeling the impact of those words. Jackson turned to his mother and continued, his voice firmer now. He said people have forgotten who they are. They forgot that there is something after all this. He said there was something coming, and that I needed to come back and let him know. Nobody could react. What could a 5-year-old be saying? Dr. Parker, still trying to maintain logic, tried a different approach. "Jackson, what did you see? Do you remember everything?" The boy blinked a few times as if he was reliving what had happened. "I remember the light. It was so big that you couldn't see the end. I was there, but I wasn't alone. They were there, but they weren't like us." The doctors remained motionless. The devices beeped non-stop. Jackson then raised his little hand and pointed to one of the corners of the room. "They are still here." The panic was immediate. The nurses looked at each other. Some doctors instinctively took a step away. "Who, son?" Evelyn asked, feeling a chill run down her spine. Jackson tilted his head slightly, as if he was hearing something that others couldn't hear. "They don't want us to forget, but a lot of people have already forgotten." Evelyn looked around, feeling a chill take over the room. Something had changed in the room. The atmosphere was different. Dr. Evans finally took the floor. "Let's do a new exam. We need to understand what happened here." But deep down, everyone there knew. There was no exam in the world capable of explaining that. Now, there was something much bigger happening, something that no one there was prepared to understand. Jackson, he knew that. The silence in the room was almost palpable. No one dared move. No one dared interrupt what was happening. Jackson, a child of just 5 years old lying in a hospital bed, looked at everyone around him with eyes that seemed to carry a weight far greater than his age. He was no longer the same boy who ran around the yard playing with his dog. Something had changed inside him, something that no one there could explain. Evelyn squeezed her son's hand tightly, trying to find a remnant of the boy she knew. But Jackson just took a deep breath, as if he carried a secret he needed to tell. His eyes moved slowly around the room, stopping on each face there, as if he was choosing his words very carefully. Time is running out. People need to hear this truth before it is too late. His voice was small, but each syllable weighed like lead. Dr. Evans, still holding his clipboard, felt a shiver run up his spine. Evelyn put her hand over her mouth, and Mark, Jackson's father, leaned closer, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "What do you mean by that, son?" Mark's voice was shaky, a mix of fear and despair. Jackson blinked slowly, as if he was still hearing something the others couldn't hear. "People have forgotten. They no longer remember what comes after." Dr. Parker, one of the doctors present, tried to intervene, forcing a rational tone. "Jackson, can you tell us what you saw? What do you mean by what comes next?" The boy looked at him for a few moments. His eyes seemed to pierce through the man, as if he saw something beyond what was visible. "There is something after, something bigger than all of this." He gestured with his small hands, trying to explain, but it was as if words were too limited to describe what he had seen. "I saw light, a lot of light, but I also saw darkness. I saw people. Some were trapped, others were free. Some screamed for help, but no one heard them." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. "And what did the angel say, my love? What did he want you to tell us?" Jackson lowered his head for a moment, as if he was reliving it inside his mind. When he looked up again, he didn't look like a child anymore. He said, "Many people don't want to believe it, who think that all of this here is enough, but it's not." Mark leaned forward, feeling a chill run through his body. "And what happens to those who don't believe, son?" The boy pursed his lips, his little fingers playing nervously with the bedsheet. "They get lost." These 3 words caused the atmosphere to change completely. The doctors looked at each other, some visibly uncomfortable. Evelyn felt a knot in her chest. "They get lost. Where, Jackson?" He hesitated. His voice got quieter, but still each word hit everyone like thunder. "They forget who they are. They forget that there is something after. They get stuck, and they can't get out." Nurse Lisa, who was at the back of the room, felt her body shudder. What he was describing was something much bigger than anyone could imagine. Jackson took a deep breath, as if trying to find the strength to continue. "He showed me a place where people wander aimlessly. They cry, they scream, they try to come back, but they can't. They no longer know who they are. They just feel afraid." The impact of those words was devastating. Dr. Evans, a skeptical man by nature, felt an inexplicable shiver come over him. This didn't seem like something a 5-year-old could come up with. "And what do you have to do, Jackson? What did the angel ask you to tell him?" The boy looked directly at his mother. His eyes were teary, but his voice was steady. "He said I have to remind people, that I have to tell them that there is still time, but it is running out." Evelyn felt her legs weaken. She sat next to her son, holding him in her arms as if trying to protect him from all that. "My love, I'm here. You don't have to carry this alone." Jackson closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, his expression changed. He looked up at the ceiling, as if he was seeing something no one else could see. "They are still here." The cold took over the room. It was as if for a moment the air had become thicker. Mark looked around, feeling the back of his neck tingle. The doctors seemed paralyzed. Lisa, the nurse, took a deep breath and took a step back. "What do you mean by them, Jackson?" The boy looked at her again. "Those who don't want us to know, the ones that make people forget." Evelyn closed her eyes for a second, trying to hold back the tears. This was too much. His son had returned, but he brought something with him. Mark, trying to stay strong, ran a hand through his hair and looked at Dr. Evans. "Have you ever seen anything like this before?" The doctor shook his head slowly, his eyes still fixed on Jackson. "Never." The boy then spoke again, his voice softer now. "The angel said that some people will still remember, but others don't want to." He paused before continuing. "And whoever doesn't want to is helping them." That last sentence was like a blow to the stomach of everyone there. Evelyn held her son tighter, as if trying to protect him from something invisible. Dr. Parker finally found the courage to speak. "Jackson, is there anything else you need to tell us?" The boy looked at him, hesitating for a moment. "He said that the truth will soon be revealed, and that when that happens, not everyone will be ready." The silence in the room was absolute. And then, as if all the tension had reached its peak, Jackson turned back to his mother and, with a voice full of emotion, said something that made Evelyn feel her heart stop. "Do you remember, Mom? Do you remember what comes next?" And at that moment, everything changed. If that didn't give you goosebumps, I don't know what would. Jackson returned with a message that cannot be ignored. But what about you? Do you remember what comes next? If this story moved you, leave in the comments what you think Jackson saw. Have you ever had a strange dream, a déjà vu, a feeling that something bigger is happening? I want to know your experience because this may be more important than we realize. And now, after everything we've heard, after every word Jackson says, comes the big question: are we really prepared for what comes next? If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you resonated with this story. Maybe a shiver went up your spine at some point, or maybe you felt that inexplicable discomfort, that feeling that there is something more than meets the eye. What if Jackson really saw what was coming? What leaves me speechless is the clarity with which he spoke. It wasn't a vague vision. It wasn't a distorted memory of a dream. It was a message that was delivered to him directly, a message that he brought from the other side. What if he's right? What if there is something we forgot? What if life is much more than this accelerated routine, than this unbridled search for things that, in the end, we cannot take with us? Jackson said that some people got lost, who live without knowing what comes next, without remembering who they really are. What if we are among these people? What if we are distracted by what doesn't matter while time passes before our eyes? Time is running out. These words keep echoing in my mind. What does this mean? Ending for whom? For the world? For each of us individually? It makes me wonder, sir, are we ignoring the signs around us? How many times has something strange happened in your life and you simply dismissed it as a coincidence? How many times have you felt like someone was there, watching, guiding, but you couldn't see? And more, why do some people not want to remember? Who are these people? And why would they insist on keeping us in the dark? If Jackson is right, and there is something bigger, something that comes later, is there still time for us to understand? The question that remains in the air is, do you remember? Do you remember what comes next? Not everyone realizes it, but some felt it. A shiver, a sign, a call. This was not by chance. There are deep mysteries, hidden truths and revelations that few know about. And what was shown today is just the beginning. Sign up now and activate the bell. Because whoever hears the call knows that there is something bigger waiting. Something brought you here, and it means more than you know. Some felt a shiver, others perceived a sign, but only those who truly understand will know what to do now. Mark your presence. Leave your like so that this message reaches those who need to hear it. And in the comments write, "I remember what comes next." Show that you are connected to this truth. What has been revealed here is just the beginning. There is something even deeper, more mysterious, something that few people know about, and that could change everything. The pieces of this puzzle are falling into place, and the next reveal could be the most impactful of all. The next video is already on the screen. Watch now and discover what few had access to. Click now and continue this journey with me.